Baker Show. Seeking answers to age-old questions. Deciphering the world painted around you by the mainstream media. This is the Kev Baker Show. And now, here is your host, Kev Baker.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back, ladies, gentlemen, children, Wookiees. It's another 2 hours of live radio right here with me, your host, Kev Baker. And you're tuned into the Kev Baker Show right here on TFRlive.com. Big audience tonight. I want to thank all of you for continuing to support the show, the network, and of course, tonight's guest stroke co-host, Mr. Anthony Patch, is with me as well. And these Monday and Wednesday shows, much like I was saying with Dr. Eric Karlstrom last night, really proud of the series of shows and the information that myself, Johnny, and of course Mr. Anthony Patch were connecting the dots on all things AI, quantum computing, the latest in kind of biohacking, all this kind of stuff. And tonight, it's going to be no different because we're going to be revisiting a topic that I first came across when I was lucky enough to read one of or a couple of Mr. Patch's books that are out there. Of course, those books are Covert Catastrophe and 2048 Diamonds in the Rough. And packed into those books is so much science. A geek like me, it's like an overload. It was brilliant. But there was one thing that stood out in all of that, and they were called nano diamonds. And that's why tonight, we've entitled tonight's show, Diamonds in the Rough. And more of that in just a moment. But for all of you Johnny Whistle hardcore supporters out there, much love and prayers to the big man because his temporal Mandela effect has struck again. Should have loaded the soundboard for that one. I really should have. Now, Anthony, I've obviously butchered the name of what's up with Johnny. And on a more serious note, I mean, we're sending prayers and love to the big man. We hope he gets well soon. But what is it that's actually wrong with John again? Calling on your paramedic history here, Tony.
I think he's been in the boxing ring too much. He has a temporal mandibular joint infection. So picture your temporal bone, which is the side of your head, around where your ear is. And then you have your jawbone, which is your mandible. And where that joint meets, where the jawbone meets with the side of your head, is the joint. And so it's called a temporal mandibular joint infection, TMJ. But I like yours better. So we'll call it the temporal Mandela effect.
Exactly. There's some people out there new to the show. They've never heard of Johnny Whistles. They don't know if he exists or not. We've got these people who come back night after night to hear Johnny Whistles. It's like some kind of Mandela effect in the making. But Anthony, we've got so much to get into tonight. Of course, we've got this new 2-hour slot. We can take our time. We can explain things a lot more thoroughly for the listeners out there. But I'm really excited about the stuff that we're going to be covering again tonight because this is all the kind of stuff that I first fell in love with, your books, your information. I was so excited to have you on the show in the first place.
Well, thank you. And it is great having the 2 hours. We can go at a little bit slower pace, but we've got a lot to pack in here tonight. We're going to talk about nano diamonds, and I'm going to kind of give the headline, the punchline. Gordy Rose. We speak of him an awful lot related to D-Wave. And as you know, he's moved over to the Kindred company building robots. Well, we're going to talk about self-replicating quantum computers composed of C60 carbon nanodiamonds that build themselves structurally, not just the qubits, but the actual structure of the computer itself is self-replicating. And that's happening at Kindred. But I'm not going to bring out the actual source material today. That's going to come out during our 2-day conference in September 16th and 17th. We will present the documented facts of how kindred is self-replicating what I call the 600-cell tetrahedron spherically configured quantum computer.
And I think it's only fair that we give Geordie Rose the odd shout out. I mean, he is a firm follower of the information that you and I and others here on the network put out there, Anthony. We know that. Yeah. He did confirm that in his recent Tech Vancouver presentation. But this Kindred company, if you missed the kind of shows that myself and Anthony and Johnny have done on them, this is the new company that Geordie Rose has gone and set up. And this is more taking AI, as he calls it, into robotics. And it's a creepy, creepy company. And I say that because he treats these AI robots as if they're children. And the reason he does that, he and his kind of colleagues, is because they think for a machine, an AI, to attain consciousness, they have to replicate the upbringing as closely as possible to that of an actual child. And we've often spoken in the past about these neural networks, Anthony, about how there's almost generations of them and layers of them. And it is, this whole process of the AI, it's such a good analogy to compare it to the kind of upbringing of a child.
Yeah, it really is. And in my book, 2048 Diamonds in the Rough, there is a quantum computer that is spherically arranged. It's a 600-cell on board a submarine that is combined and composed of nanodiamonds itself. It's a sentient submarine in the shape of a manta ray. Now, the point here is this computer is sentient and AI, and it begins around the age of 12 when it is first, let's say, flip the switch, and it goes live on board the submarine. But it progresses through adolescence and early adulthood all the way up to the age of 33. And I wrote that back in 2014.
You see, well ahead of everyone else. And this was the first time I had ever heard of nanodiamonds. And, when I'd read new stuff like that, he's all new anyway. Before I met Anthony, there was a geek in me. Science, used to love it. So when I heard about these nanodiamonds, I started to have a look around, see what was going on with them. And there was one article that I saved back at the time, and this just encapsulates everything that we're going to kind of go into tonight. And I'm going to go through this here. And it comes from back in 2013. So this is nothing new at all. And it says that the first assembled nanodiamond qubits are the vanguard of the quantum computing revolution. German researchers have devised a technique of creating self-assembled nanodiamond qubits that could form the basis of quantum computers and storage devices, unlike every other quantum tech that we've seen here on the website. And it could operate at room temperature. Now, that factor itself is very, very interesting, because usually when we're talking about quantum effects and quantum bits, as in the qubits, we're usually talking about right down at the very lowest end of the Kelvin scale, very, very cold, to keep that coherence. But yet here they are talking about these things operating at room temperature. And to carry on, it says there are many ways of storing quantum data: atom spin, electron spin, photon spin. There are also many mediums that can act as qubits too: single atoms, laser light, and whole molecules. One combination excels above all others, though: storing photons in a diamond nitrogen vacancy center. And this is where it gets really, really cool. It says here, this is essentially a diamond molecule, which is made up of carbon atoms, with a single nitrogen atom replacing one of the carbons. It turns out that nitrogen atoms are remarkably good at storing photons, including the quantum data that they carry for incredibly long periods, and they talk about milliseconds here. Now, more importantly, while virtually every other qubit material must be kept at cryogenic temperatures, diamond nitrogen qubits can do this at room temperature without suffering from decoherence. The problem so far, though, has been the constructing small enough diamonds that the nitrogen atoms, the individual qubits, are close enough to each other that they can interact. According to Technology Review, the diamonds have to be within 10 nanometers of each other. And now Andreas Albrecht and fellow researchers at the University of Ulm, Germany, get this. They have used DNA to build a scaffold that allows 6 nanodiamonds to self-assemble in a ring, potentially creating a 6-qubit quantum computer. Now, Tony, there's a little bit more to this article, but so far, this is everything that you've been kind of talking about, including the DNA as well, and using these nanoparticles. This is in here as well, how they use the DNA structure for them to kind of self-assemble. This is amazing, and this is how we can take your stuff from a book of fiction and show that it really is the science from the real world that they're working on right now. In fact, who knows what they're working on now?
Yeah, this is some great backstory for people, because with both my books, with Covert Catastrophe that I wrote in November of 2011, predating this 2013 article, I described this whole process of nanodiamond lattice work, the configuration, based upon the work that was done at UC Berkeley with their particle collider, their synchrotron, which produces hard X-rays that they infer the shape of DNA, specifically the protein folding, the proteins that make up DNA. And from the ability to infer the shape and the construct of proteins within DNA, they were able to then predict how the nanodiamonds would self-assemble. So what they did was, in the early stages of this nanodiamond research, is they provided an artificial lattice, a medium in a, let's say, in a petri dish sort of a scenario, just to make it simple. And upon this lattice work, the diamonds would self-adhere, and then they would self-replicate. And they then took that to the process of creating the nitrogen voids within each nanodiamond, then using a specific frequency pulsed laser to transmit photons representing either a 0 or a 1 that is then placed within this nitrogen vacancy void, this defect, literally, within the diamond. And as long as the diamond remained intact, that information remained stable and intact. So you have a virtual permanent database of information housed in the diamonds. And they also showed that they had a natural affinity in self-replicating in this lattice work to define a double helical structure, and in fact, a triple helix structure. And therefore, back in 2013, I began this whole discussion of the nanoparticles that are being sprayed on us, that are nanodiamonds, that are dormant, which through electromagnetism, through signals, specifically millimeter wave 5G signals, the dormant nanoparticle, nanodiamonds within all of us would be, upon throwing the switch of 5G, would activate this self-replication process of these nanodiamonds that comprise the third strand of DNA. That is in both of my books, Covert Catastrophe and 2048 Diamonds in the Rough, producing this artificial, self-replicating computer system.
I think it's really interesting there how you said it even assembled into a triple helix, because as we've mentioned on the show before, even the guys, the Drs. Watson and Dr. Crick, when they were trying to work out this DNA molecule, I mean, there was talk at the start of that. They were looking at a triple helix because that seemed to fit the bill more than the double helix did. And here we have the 5G that we keep on talking about now with multiple guests, because this really is such a big threat and it's right upon us right now. Could it be then, Tony, that when you have this 5G, because it goes millimeter deep, and some research says it may even penetrate the skin to a depth of 8 millimeters, is this literally unzipping the DNA then, ready for that third strand to be inserted?
Yeah, it really is. And again, the 5G, as you and Dr. Carlstrom discussed last night, is a continuation of our discussion on 5G the day before that. The deployment of not just boxes on telephone poles, so to speak, the boxes that are about a foot square that we've seen in the media presentations as transmitters and receivers of 5G, but literally down to microscopic size antennas for 5G that will be deployed everywhere. And when the new phones come out with 5G capability, they will have multiple antennas built in to the phones for 4G and 5G capabilities. So yes, the Internet of Everything. We're going to get into talking about some of the new types of sensors that are coming out, but the whole point is 5G penetrates the body right down to the DNA level, and that is the mechanism by which they will flip the switch on the dormant nanoparticle third strand.
And obviously, calling on last night's show as well, Tony, just to build on that, you were listening to how the doc was talking about these false memories, and that fits like a hand in a glove with your information on the quantum pollution as well. And it builds a kind of bigger picture. And it seems to be now, every show as we go along, we're building a bigger and more detailed picture of this system that has been already built around us.
Yeah, and because we have plenty of time tonight, we're going to talk about the specifics of mind control. Because when you look at AI as a system, yes, it's an existential threat, and it's a today threat. It's actually been a threat for quite a while now. The point being is AI is just another tool in the toolbox for the ultimate application. And the ultimate application, as Dr. Carlstrom presented it, and I'm reinforcing and confirming with him, is the control of the mind and the control of the physical body. This is what the globalists want. They don't need guns and bullets. They don't need any other weaponry. All they need to do is control the minds and bodies of the population. And we'll get into that deeper as to how that is done using magnetic resonance imaging in the hospital, known as MRI. And I have an article in the June issue of Entangled Magazine explaining how MRI is used as the MRI process, the slicing of the brain that is done with an MRI, and how you actually manipulate a human brain at the physical level using an MRI and 5G. So you'll find that in Entangled Magazine.
But, the deeper we go into this, I mean, when I first came into all this information, we hear about the New World Order, Tony, and we think of global government and all the stuff that goes with that. And Max Egan, he kind of strung it all together the other night. I mean, what we're describing here, this 5G control system, right down to our thoughts, our memories, even our bodily functions. It's the ultimate control system. This is the New World Order system, isn't it?
It is, and they have ramped up the deployment. You and I on the show day before yesterday on Monday, we played some excerpts in which the 5G industrial leaders, let's say the representatives, were meeting and speaking with Donald Trump, President Trump. And Trump's response was to issue a strong letter to the cities to cut the red tape on allowing the full and rapid deployment of 5G antennas, transmitters, and receivers throughout the cities, because they were complaining to the president that the permit process was taking 1 year to 2 years in some cases to get approval to deploy this. And his whole thing is just cut through the red tape. We need to rebuild the infrastructure of the United States. So just go ahead and deploy this. We don't need any testing. Where's the EPA when we need them? I said, well, they're not here to help us. The president is not looking at the health aspects, the ramifications of 5G. All he's thinking of from the mindset of being a contractor a business, a real estate developer is just deploy the projects, just build the country back out, which is great. Let's rebuild the infrastructure. But underneath that big umbrella of infrastructure, of freeways and bridges and bringing companies back to the United States, manufacturing, you've got to take in the health aspects of what you're talking about beneath that umbrella of infrastructure build out. But it's already there, folks. It's too far ahead. They've already got the traction. 5G is already being rolled out. The area that I'm in, 5G is all over the place here. So it's not 2020. It's not 5 years out. 5G is right here, and they're accelerating the deployment timeline, the timetable, because they have to have control over people. And they're so afraid of people like myself and Kev Baker and Dr. Karlstrom and Brian too, and all of us that are talking about 5G, Alana Freeland, Dane Wigington with geoengineering. We're all blowing the whistle, and there are a lot of other people that are. And so the powers that be, the globalists, are concerned that as we do this whistleblowing, more people are becoming aware of it, and perhaps will try to either slow or stem the tide of the deployment of 5G.
Richie in the chat saying, so we get 5G for control and RF for tracking. Well, the 5G plays into the tracking as well, because all of the smart devices, all of the sensors that will be deployed everywhere, there'll be constantly two-way traffic. They'll be sending things to us and also sending our location and stuff back to the main database. And then we've also got Jabber, Baby Wookie, what a name, brilliant, love it. Are there diamonds in Afghanistan? And I think we need to kind of clarify this here, because I didn't realize this when I first came across nano diamonds either. I mean, these aren't the kind of very valuable ones that you go mining for or things like that. I mean, we can reproduce these, or we can totally manufacture these in laboratories. And Anthony, I think it's just graphene, isn't it? Put under very, very high pressure, because that's basically what the natural process is for creating diamonds anyway, right?
Yeah, let's make a distinction. Yes, these are industrial diamonds that are grown in the laboratory, and they don't require high pressure laboratory conditions, compressing carbon to create gemstones, so to speak. No, this is C12, carbon 12, and carbon 13, which are being used as nanosensors. They're also comprised of diamond. Nanosensors we'll get into after the break, but these are comprised of nano diamonds. These are self-growing. If you've ever had one of the science kits as a kid in which you would mix the chemicals and they would grow crystals, this is exactly what we're talking about, okay? It's the growing of crystals. This is not pressure manufacturing of gemstones. Now, in terms of the qubits that are used in the self-replicating nanodiamond composed computer systems, we're talking about C60 carbon, which is what our brains are composed of. When we talk about the tubulin dimers, these are comprised of and housed in the C60 carbon Bucky tubes. These are buckyballs that form into Bucky tubes, microtubules. These are all C60 carbon. We are a carbon-based life form. So for the computer, C60. When we're talking about sensors and we're talking about growing crystals of diamond, we're talking about carbon 12 and carbon 13 and carbon 60. The third strand of DNA, nanodiamonds, are C60. They are biological carbon. Go ahead.
Now, Anthony, we're down at the nano kind of scale here, right? Absolutely tiny. My question to you is, and this is obviously us going into the land of speculation now, but when we're talking about the aerosol spraying, I mean, what kind of size are we talking about here? Could we inhale these without even knowing about it?
Yeah, you were talking about in this article that you were quoting, down around 5 nanometers. We're talking about a range of 5 to 11 nanometers. These third strand of DNA nano crystals or nano diamonds. So we are well down below the threshold of 100 nanometers that they were citing in that article. So again, between 5 and 11, that's all you need. And these can be sensors or they can be qubits.
And it used to be that diamonds were a girl's best friend. Who would have known they would become so popular in the realms of quantum computing? And as Anthony says, we'll be getting into a whole lot more of this nano diamond stuff after the break with sensors. We'll be learning more about the upcoming conference as well. Stay tuned for all of that. You can find Anthony's books that I've been referring to tonight, 2048, Diamonds in the Rough, and Covert Catastrophe. You can get them over at anthonypatch.com. Go and check it out, and then we'll be back in 3 short minutes with a lot more from Anthony Patch and me, Kev Baker, right here on the Kev Baker Show. Don't go anywhere.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
3 minutes have come and gone, and we are back live right here on the Kev Baker Show on tfrlive.com. I'm obviously Kev Baker, and tonight I'm joined by the brilliant Anthony Patch, and we're getting into diamonds in the rough. Probably not what you were thinking when you seen the title, because you know it, we had to go science with this, and we're talking nano diamonds, quantum bit nano diamonds, no less. We're going to be building upon this and going so much further. And, you know, true synchronicity as it works here on TFR. We know how this goes, right? We're doing such a specific kind of show tonight, nano diamonds. And yet today, when I go looking for news, you guessed it, there's a story about diamonds in the media. And this time, it's talking about the fact that scientists have just created diamond rain that forms in the interior of icy gas giants. Now they're talking about how the fact that basically the processes that go on when you go to these gas giants, they produce these massive, absolutely massive at times, diamonds. And they've been able to recreate this for the first time. And right at the bottom of the article, there's a subheadline as it goes into the last part, and it says, Nano Diamonds at Work. And here we have a story talking about these kind of processes that happen way out there in our own solar system and beyond. And yet somehow it connects to tonight's show, because the very end, the Nano Diamonds at Work goes on to explain exactly what we're talking about here tonight, that we are using these nano diamonds right here on Earth because of these amazing properties that they have. We can make them quantum, per se. Knock a carbon out, a nitrogen in there, put a photon in, give it a bit of spin, 1 and a 0 at the same time, and Tony, here we go. But isn't it funny how this story that should really be unrelated to what we're going into tonight ends up at the end going into exactly what we're talking about?
Yes, indeed. I do find it interesting in the fact that about a year ago, you and I were talking about nano diamonds at the quantum scale. We were talking about this third strand of DNA scenario that we've been going through. But back then, I had mentioned to you that in the research of nano diamonds, that it was proven that in our brains, we had buckyballs. Now, buckyballs look like soccer balls. That is the self-assembly of C60 carbon into tetrahedrons, which form both hexagons and pentagons. When they form those two structures, they then form into a sphere, which looks just like a soccer ball. Think of geodesic domes and a geodesic sphere. Now, this is all Buckminster Fuller, so they call them buckyballs and Buckminster Fullerenes. Now, when we talked about that a year ago, we also talked about the fact that they had just through the Hubble Space Telescope discovered in the Crab Nebula and some of the other nebula actual Buckminster Fullerene structures. They found the tubular form and they found the buckyballs. Now, the tubes are formed from the buckyballs, so that's the smaller structure. But they are at the cosmological level in the star systems as well as down at the DNA level that we're talking about tonight.
You know, I'm really wanting to press into this kind of nano diamonds more, because I do think this is the kind of thing that we have been breathing in, right? And you're talking about how they naturally form into these tubes, and I've seen the papers from the science kind of websites as well. Absolutely bang on. Then we see something called Morgellons, Tony. Now, has anyone ever checked one of these strands to see if it's actually a tubule like we're describing here, built up the way we're talking about?
I believe that that is something that even the researchers that are trying to blow the whistle on Morgellons, the people that are collecting samples and having them taken to independent laboratories for analysis, I don't believe that they have gone down far enough in their examination. And I say far enough, I'm talking about literally to the scale of the nanoscale, in terms of using a scanning electron microscope, or if they could get access to a place like Berkeley synchrotron and using hard X-rays from a synchrotron, then they would be able to do, as I said a moment ago before the break, they could actually infer the structure of the Morgellons structures. I think if they used hard X-rays or a scanning electron microscope, they would very quickly realize that they were observing an artificial structure composed of C60 carbon in the shape of these Buckminster fullerene tubules.
And because these are C60 carbon, I mean, our body aren't necessarily going to recognize them as being alien per se, are they, because of carbon 60 being everywhere?
That is exactly correct, because what they're using are literally the building block components, the elements that naturally arise within our own body. So yes, our immune system would not reject them. Now, we've seen with Morgellons the surrounding of white blood cells, which are the mechanism of our immune system, the white blood cells surrounding the Morgellons components, but they are not able to reject them. They do view them as a physical foreign body, but they don't reject those Morgellon strands. And they are quite literally antennas. Understand that carbon is a conductive medium, so it can both send and receive signals. And that is exactly why the microtubules of our brains are composed of these Buckminster fullerene microtubules, is because they absorb signals, electromagnetic signals, and they transmit them. And that includes photons. And that's the primary vehicle of transmitting data from DNA, which is your memories. The data within the DNA is transferred within the brain and processed within the brain, because that's all the brain is. It is not a storage medium. It is a processor.
It's the CPU, right? If we kind of compare it to a computer, our eyes are our webcams, we've got our ears, they're like our microphones, and the brain, I mean, it's the most amazing quantum CPU that exists in the universe that we know of. And that's exactly why they've tried to model their most amazing quantum computer on it.
Yeah, they have. And, you know, we have been watching and reading things in the last couple of days, and you talking to Dr. Karlstrom last night, in fact, he was again confirming from his parallel but separate research that we are looking at the process in the world of artificial intelligence and quantum computers, as he called them supercomputers, but more specifically quantum computers. We are looking at the modeling of the human brain, the modeling of the processes within the human brain, and that's electromagnetic processes, and building these algorithms that mimic the transmission of data within the brain. So we always try to be specific and definitive here. We're talking about ones and zeros. When they talk about building algorithms that mimic the way the brain processes information, it's more than just the pattern of neurons and synapses and the connecting of synapses and these gaps, the gaps between the synapses and the pattern of distribution of signals. What they're also doing is writing code, algorithms, writing code by looking at the actual zeros and ones in the brain, which is examining the tubulin dimers, the arrangement, the pattern, and the transmitting of zeros and ones by the dimers through the microtubules, which then from the neuron, which the microtubules are contained in, from the neurons to the synapse and the gap, the junction. So we always have to go down deep and say, well, when they're building patterns, when they're building algorithms, let's be definitive. And that's what I just outlined for you.
Well, it's amazing when this all comes together like this. And, we're talking about mind control here on a scale and a level that I don't think many of us, if we had been told about this maybe 5 years ago, would ever have thought believable. I mean, why would they even need to go to this level? But they have, and they are. And, we often say that, especially when it comes to the gang stalking stuff with the MK Ultra programs that we refer to a lot, and they use drugs there, the LSD. We were talking before the show, Tony, and I think it's worthy for the listeners to hear it as well, how when they were using the LSD, they even used it on the public en masse as well for kind of to see the effectiveness of the drug for mind control purposes. And you fast forward to the 21st century, and it's a new spin, pardon the pun, on mind control, because now you can say that instead of the LSD to test its effectiveness, you can implant false memories, false thoughts, right down to that very level to build a model of just how effectively you can control people.
Yeah, again, I commend Dr. Karlstrom and Brian Two's work and research and release of information regarding targeted individuals and mind control. And I agree with their statements in terms of masses of numbers of people, talking about multiple millions of people around the world that now are being influenced by this system of mind control. And we aren't necessarily saying that the nanoparticle third strand of DNA, that switch has been thrown, because that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, and we'll have time for it a little bit later, think about a magnetic resonance imaging device and how it actually captures a picture of the processes of the brain, and we'll be more definitive about that later. But what we're describing here is mind control, in which you are physically altering the mind at the tubulin dimer level. What you're doing there is changing the spin of the quantum particles that make up the tubulin dimers, which are binary. They're 0 and 1. They are also ternary. I'm not going to go down the ternary path right now. If we have time later, we'll talk about the -1, 0, and +1 programming system that D-Wave is using. But to just keep it simple, they are actually changing the quantum spin, which is the angular momentum and the direction of the quantum particles as they spin. If you change the spin, you change them from either being a 0 or a 1. The point here is millions of people through the 5G broadcast signal are able to have their minds changed, as Karlstrom was saying last night, and I concur. When I say changing the mind, I'm saying you are actually placing thoughts and images in people's minds. We've talked about it in terms of quantum pollution and the Mandela effect, and relating that to the activities of D-Wave's quantum computers. What we're being specific about here is that these thoughts and pictures, the way they manifest in the human brain is by changing the zeros and ones of the tubulin dimers, by altering the spin. And when you talk about spin, we're also talking about the process of magnetic resonance imaging in the hospital. So we'll get into that later, but the point is it's an MRI type of process of not necessarily just receiving a picture of what's going on in the human brain, but transmitting by doing a reverse engineering of the MRI. Now, Kev, I'm going to let you jump in here, but just as a tangent, remember I said the 4 detectors within the main ring of the CERN Large Hadron Collider, when you back engineer the structure, the physical structure of those detectors at CERN, they are identical to the structure and processes of an MRI machine in a hospital. Go ahead.
And we've shown that actually pictorially a couple of times. And the first time I've seen it, and I'll try and find a picture. I'm sure I've got one saved in your folder with all the other pictures I've got for you. But I'll post it.
That's a thick folder.
It actually really, really is, Tony. You know all the Photoshop stuff I get up to, and I'm like a digital hoarder. I'm scared to delete things, right? So I just shove it in your folder. But getting back to this, when you're thinking quantum, and in particular for tonight's show, these nano diamonds, it is all about the spin. We keep going back to the spin, changing the spin of this, changing the spin of that. And that is literally how you change the value of these quantum bits. And that's what makes them so special. And that's why, I mean, they're being used in medicine. They're being used for so many different kind of purposes right now as we speak. And before the break, we even mentioned, Tony, how the quantum sensors, this is something we were going to go into here. And it's all about this spin again, because when you use them for whatever it may be, medical, computing, they're utilizing and they're taking advantage of that spin that produces the quantum effect, right? Is Mr. Patch there? You know, I think somebody...
I'm sorry, we're talking...
I thought
we're there.
Yeah, I thought somebody had spun you out of control there, Tony.
Yeah, they tried to. I did a 180 on them. We're talking about CERN and the 4 detectors being MRI devices. And here's an article that you sent to me from CERN. This is in physics.org, August 8th, 2017, titled Spinning Diamonds for Quantum Precision. This is using nanodiamonds as quantum sensors. And this comes right out of CERN. Okay, and they say right here, quantum sensors are highly sensitive, and among their many promising applications, they are ushering in a new era of MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, that is making visible the tiny details inside cells and proteins. Okay, so we're going to get into that a little bit more. But the point is, here is your smoking gun to CERN and MRI, and the whole discussion that I've presented to you for a long time now, my friend, about raising the dead, the resurrection of the dead through CERN by taking the digitized DNA, this sequenced DNA that's been converted to ones and zeros, and taking the digitized DNA of the dead, and through CERN's MRI machine / detectors, reverse engineering, reversing the process, utilizing them as an MRI, and then not only the MRI for the purpose of arranging the digital coding, the sequencing, but they then become, drum roll please, 3D printers.
Oh.
Printing DNA. That is the resurrection of the dead process within CERN that will be coming up very soon.
And this printing of DNA, I mean, in labs right now, we've covered this before as well. I mean, they say that 1 gram of DNA has the potential to solve all the data storage problems in the world. And they're literally writing and rewriting DNA as we speak. They're encoding whatever the heck they want in there. There was one story about a bacteria that had a full movie encoded into its DNA, a total synthetic kind of life form, Anthony. And 3 generations later, that movie was still there, and it could be read and it could be reproduced and rendered exactly the way it was 2 generations ago.
Yeah, that's, again, the example of the nanodiamonds. As long as those diamonds are intact, the ones and zeros embedded in the voids, in the nitrogen voids, will remain intact as well. So when we talk about coherence and decoherence being errors, and the decoherence, which is also the breakdown of the quantum entanglement between these qubits, as long as they can maintain the stability of those quantum particles, diamonds, nanodiamonds in a lattice format. As long as they can maintain that lattice structure, they can maintain the coherence, minimizing the decoherence, and elongate the time frame of quantum entanglement, which by increasing the time frame of entanglement, you decrease the decoherence, therefore reduce the errors, therefore you're able to transmit and receive more information in a quantum computer for a longer period of time with a stable database composed of diamond.
And of course, this is, I mean, we speak about D-wave as well, right? And this is connected to it as well. And I mean, this is speculation, of course, but I mean, the nano diamonds, the D-wave, all this kind of stuff, it's no stranger to each other, right?
No, they're no stranger to any. All of this is connected together. And I'll just make a big connection for you, kind of come back from the nano, level here for a sec. What runs D-wave are the self-replicating nano diamonds, as we're saying. That's what runs the machine. But what do they use the machine for? Euphemistically, it's like a communication system between parallel dimensions. It's like a telephone, if you will. This is necromancy, this is geomancy, this is all of those mancies rolled together. But what do they apply that information to? Well, they apply it to CERN. They apply it to the experiments that they're running and they're conducting at CERN. CERN is likewise gathering information from the other side. Now, the ultimate application of D-wave in its connection with CERN is the control mechanism. The quantum computers control the quantum scale portal that will be opened, and they will determine and control the duration that portal is open before they close it again. And again, that portal is just like the mechanism with D-wave in its interdimensional communication that they're doing now with the computers will be on a macro scale with the portal that is open. Think of the portal being opened as a massive scale quantum computer process.
Yeah, almost like the D-wave. It's like your sniper, very precise little holes, and then you've got the CERN side of things, the macro side. It's like cannonballs they're going to be punching through in that kind of fabric. But, here we are, and when Tony talks about communicating with other dimensions, we're only pulling from D-Wave founder Geordie Rose's own words, because he's the guy that says that's the special thing about it. The fact that it does have kind of communication with these mind-boggling numbers of parallel realities. So when people maybe kind of mock this kind of stuff when we're talking about them communicating with other dimensions, always bear in mind where we're getting that information from. And then the fact that he never even ridiculed it when he addressed it recently at Tech Vancouver. He merely said we hijacked what he said, Tony. He never said that what we were saying was false, just that we had used his idea for kind of our own purposes.
Yeah, and yet we were not manipulating his statements, nor did we take them out of context. And in fact, in the August issue of Entangled magazine, I transcribed that entire Vancouver Tech presentation that he made. I presented his own words in that article so that it was clear to people that we were not taking anything out of context. And I also related the video that we've cited for so many years that came out in 2013, in which Geordie Rose was making a scientific presentation, and he was talking about the numbers of parallel dimensions. And in 2013, he cited the model 512 qubit model, that it was accessing 2 to the 500th power of parallel dimensions, and that they were extracting, or they were grabbing resources, as he said, from these parallel dimensions. And they were realizing not only information and resources, but 10% more power was coming through. And so I placed the label, my own label, which I called quantum pollution, because of what was coming in from these parallel dimensions, and therefore relating the quantum pollution to the manifestation of the psychological operation, the beta testing of mind control, known as the Mandela effect.
We need kind of drum rolls and sound effects for when we say Mandela effect. It's just not good enough throwing it out there, Tony.
Dun, dun, dun.
But listen, folks, I hope you're enjoying this so far. And of course, you know, we were meant to go into the conference that's coming up. We'll do that on the other side of the break. Remind me, Anthony, don't let me get all excited again. You see, this is what happens. Same happened with Doc Karlstrom last night. I've got so many thoughts firing off in my head. I'm going to have to get Anne to get some duct tape, and she can just kind of zip me up when the guest starts talking, because so much goes on in my head. And I bet the audience out there, they must be throwing things at the monitor at times. Must be like, let Anthony get back to what he was talking to, for goodness sake. But if you want to find more of Anthony's work, head on over to anthonypatch.com. And Tony, we've got about a minute. I mean, when is the conference coming up? And we can get into more details on the other side of the break.
Yeah, thank you. September 16th and 17th, it'll be live stream. We'll have access through the anthonypatch.com website. Registration opens on Friday. I want to thank Robbie and Cheryl and all of her team at SE Studios for doing all of the hard work and hard lifting that it takes to pull this off. This isn't just flip the switch on YouTube and we're doing a live stream. No, this is very complicated, very sophisticated, and they have put in hundreds of hours to make this thing happen. It's only $10 a day, and it just goes to cover our costs. Thanks, Kev.
I've seen Cheryl hanging out in the chat room. If you want to join the chat room and all the wonderful people over there, so many listening tonight, you can go over to tfrlive.com/chat. Now, we're going to be back for hour number 2 after the break. We've got so much more that Anthony needs to get into. Whether we do or not because of me, only time will tell. But we'll be back on the other side. Don't go anywhere.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Hour number 2 right here on the Kev Baker Show on Truth Frequency Radio. And of course, we are here at tfrlive.com. If you're listening out there on iHeartRadio, TalkStream Live, any of these other bajillion of kind of methods that you can use to listen to the show, obviously a big, huge warm welcome to all of you. And it's thanks to all of you out there that we keep coming back night after night and trying to present to you the very best of information. And tonight, along with me, I've got Anthony Patch from anthonypatch.com. You can catch his show right here on a Friday. He's got a really cool co-host with him. Can't remember his name, but it starts the same time as the Kev Baker Show. Right here.
It's your clone.
Yeah, that's it. It's Alter Kev. If you've got the alt right, we can have Alt Kev. So Alt Kev is Tony's co-host on a Friday. And if you're tuning in, expecting to hear Johnny Whistles, unfortunately, he has been struck down by a kind of reoccurrence of this temporal Mandela effect. I know, butchered the name, but you know me. And hopefully, just hopefully, Johnny will get well soon and he'll be back with us tomorrow night. But Anthony, before we get back into all this science and the diamonds in the rough that we've been covering brilliantly tonight, I'm loving all this. We've got the conference coming up, right? I've got my new smoking jacket ready. I'm going to grow one of these interesting beards, probably. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. But I know there's so many people out there on a serious side that want to hear more about full spectrum dominance. So tell us what we can expect and when we can get the tickets.
Well, thanks, Kev. Yeah, we've got some great speakers coming up for this conference, and I really, really am so indebted to them for giving up their time and their research. And it's going to be tip of the spear. It's going to be new information from each speaker. Tickets go on sale thanks to Robbie and Cheryl at SE Studios. They have done all of the yeoman's work in making this happen so that Friday we can begin to take registrations for the conference. It's only $10 per day is all we're asking. You look at a lot of live streamed conferences that are out there and they're charging $80 to $100 just to watch their conference. And I got to tell you, quite honestly, a lot of these don't go into new material. They tend to rehash the rehash. And we are not going to do that. We always try to give you the latest breaking information in the world of technology as well as in the Christian world. So on Saturday, we're going to present the evidence of full spectrum dominance. We call this a divine battle plan, utilizing the principles and strategies from the Art of War from Sun Tzu, because this is a spiritual war. We do not wrestle with flesh and blood, but with spiritual forces. So the evidence of that is in the physical world, and then Sunday we'll talk about the spiritual side of it. But 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock on Saturday, the 16th, I will open this up talking about all of the topics as an overview. And then our first speaker will be Sidney Burns. Pardon me. Sidney Burns is a high-level engineer from a national organization. He has worked with Kevin and myself putting together what is known as the threat matrix. So we're taking the major disciplines of science and showing you the specific threats, and we're talking about existential threats to all of humanity. And we have arranged it in a very cohesive, coherent presentation called the Threat Matrix. And that will be Sidney Burns from 10 to 11 in the morning. These are Pacific Standard Times, okay? Next will be our friend Alana Freeland. We've had on both my show and Kev's show quite a bit talking about full spectrum dominance, the title of one of her books, and talking about the space fence that literally encircles the Earth at this point. She'll give us the latest on that. We will have Dane Wigington, who is doing parallel research into geoengineering along with Alana Freeland. And he will be continuing that thought, that stream, talking about the terraforming of the planet itself. So we'll move from the space fence surrounding the Earth to the specifics of what is going on in our environment, both in the atmosphere and at the Earth level. Then we will have David Heavener, Hollywood movie producer, on at 11:30 to 2:30 Pacific Standard, 1:30 to 2:30 Pacific Standard Time. He'll be talking about the predictive programming coming out of Hollywood and the mainstream media. And again, this will be the latest information, not a rehash of what not only he's presented on our shows, but what other people have talked about regarding Hollywood. We're going to go to the tip of the spear on that. Then our good friend Clyde Lewis from Ground Zero Radio will be on speaking about the origins of occult technology, the history, the foundation, the occulted aspects, the hidden aspects of where all of our technology is derived from. So a big thanks to Clyde Lewis to make time. You know, he broadcasts Monday through Friday, and he puts in a lot of time. And for he to come on with us on a Saturday from his downtime is really extraordinary. But I want to...
Tony, who's again? Who is it from Ground Zero that's coming on again?
Clyde Lewis.
I just had to hear you say that again. Clyde Lewis, everyone. Come on.
Now, I mean, he has next to Coast to Coast, he is the number 2 talk radio program in this genre. And he gets into a broad spectrum, pardon the pun, of topics, but he also understands the origins of technology from the occult side. And that's why I've asked him to come on and speak to that. Now, he is a big friend of yours, a big fan of yours as well, Kev. And I just want to say thank you to Clyde Lewis, because he's the one who really brought me into the public venue, into the public view on all of my research that I've been doing. And I first appeared in public on his show and have since been with him many times. And I really appreciate what he has done to help me get my research out into the world. So that'll conclude at 3:30, and then I'll wrap it up talking about artificial intelligence and 5G with the latest information. Again, not a rehash, running from 3:30 to 4:30 Pacific. Now, Sunday, we will get into the solutions. We're going to talk about the spiritual side, the spiritual warfare that's going on, and what are the solutions to all of these things that we will present on Saturday. So that about does it. Go ahead, Kev.
No, amazing stuff. And even before the show, Anthony, and I know a lot of our listeners, they follow most of our shows that we do, your show included, on a Friday. And we had a very serious and very kind of sobering conversation with Dane Wigington just on Friday there, where he put a kind of time scale on things. It's been maybe 8 years that this planet basically has left. And we often talk about existential threats, don't we? And I was kind of saying to you that we've often speculated that when it comes to this mark of the beast, be it the neural lace, the activation of the 5G, there'll be some kind of choice or free will come into it. And they'll probably offer it up as having superpowers. You can access the internet in your head, telepathic communications, blah-de-blah. But, you know, with the planet and the environment, and it's undoubtedly there is problems with the planet right now, and with all this geoengineering that's been going on, and it itself tied to this control system we're talking about. I mean, if kind of the radiation levels on the planet go up, Anthony, and we're seeing UVB, it's off the scale. It's going into the UVC kind of range now, and before long it might even be hitting X-rays. I mean, humans can't handle that. So we often talk about problem, reaction, solution. If you can create a crisis as opposed to offering some kind of enhancement where they have to take this third strand, or you get the choice to take this chip that will allow you kind of to live in this new environment. CRISPR-9, it could tweak your DNA so you can repair itself with more powerful or longer exposure to radiation, that kind of scenario. And that's where all of these kind of existential threats we cover, they all come together.
Yeah, they certainly do. And that's why we're trying to provide at this conference not just an overview. We're really trying to take this opportunity without commercial interruptions and that sort of thing to give bullet points at the tip of the spear of the newest information that these extraordinary researchers are conducting. And, you know, again, they're gracious enough to present this information. And, you know, I really think that people should come to the table and support them. And everybody puts themselves at personal risk. I mean, you talk about targeted individuals. Every one of these speakers is a targeted individual, myself and Kev included. And, you know, that was proven. You know, sidestep a little bit. You know, when Gordy Rose, with that Tech Vancouver presentation, had my picture up on his PowerPoint of your graphic, your Photoshop of our show taken from YouTube, and we were talking about the Mandela effect, that really, I think you'll agree with me, Kev, really confirmed that we are definitely on their radar screen, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about it now. And we're used to tongue-in-cheek kind of joke about it. And you've had a more serious run-in with a couple of men in black, for lack of a better term here. But, you know, it's definitely, as soon as we've seen Gordy Rose and the fact that he was choosing to address that at such a public kind of forum, we're definitely on to something here. I couldn't agree with you more. And there's so much talk in the chat room still about this kind of Mandela effect. And, you know, when I first started working with Dr. Karlstrom, he mentioned the fact that from the research he was doing, pulling from others who had looked into this, that this was probably millions of people around the planet were TIs, targeted individuals. And anyone out there right now who is or has noticed that a Mandela effect, be it the Bernstein Bears, whatever you want, the Queen song, any one of them, Magic Mirror, 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 you do appreciate that that means that you too are part of this targeted individual program, because they've literally implanted false memories in your mind and blocked real ones. It's exactly the same stuff as we're talking about with Karlstrom and with Anthony Patch. We've all actually been actively guinea pigs in this. Now, some people don't notice these Mandela effects. And that's how, for me, that we can tell that it's not reality itself. It's not books changing around the world. It's not films changing overnight. It's our perception of them. It's how we're actually remembering things. And we're adamant, right? We're adamant it's one way, not another. And that's because our memory is that way. But it's not our memory anymore. And that's why, Anthony, we've all become targeted individuals. And it really is in the millions when you think about it that way.
It really is. And, Sunday at the conference, Kathleen Urquhart and myself will be addressing the solutions, and we will break down this Mandela effect and this psychological influence that's going on. And it won't be, just a rehash, as I'm continuing to say, about the Mandela effect. It will be actually, how do you counter it? And it's not just the beta test psychological operation of the Mandela effect. That's just what we see and what we acknowledge and what we are aware of. As Karlstrom very well presented last night, there are millions of people who don't even realize that they are being manipulated beyond any discussion of the Mandela effects, because those are obvious. What's insidious is that millions of people do not have a conscious awareness that there are thoughts being implanted in their minds today and have been for a long time. Now, Kev, you and I were the first ones well over a year ago who said that the Mandela effect was a psychological operation. Now, as all this other stuff we've talked about in the past is all coming out now and being confirmed, and in this case confirmed by Dr. Karlstrom and the whistleblower Brian Tu, who was a targeted individual himself and is still being targeted and harassed and threatened. So I think, credit is due to both of us for saying that it's a psychological operation manifest as this grabbing of resources, Gordy Rose's words, from parallel dimensions. What we're saying here when we say parallel dimensions and the grabbing of resources is all of this psychological manipulation of people is being driven by the quantum computer systems. These are adiabatic quantum computers that are now self-replicating and self-evolving and self-teaching, self-learning, deep machine learning, recursive neural network process of learning. They are becoming more and more intrusive, more and more powerful for the purpose of literally controlling people's minds and physical bodies. This is the increasing of the granularity of the data in the sentient world simulation. So, Kev, let's go to the article, Hyper-Entanglement Across Rooftops Paves the Way Toward a Global Quantum Internet, published August 23rd, 2017. That's today, folks. Tip of the spear information coming out of physics.org. I want you to go ahead and present that. But what I'm saying here, folks, is Kev made a profound statement last night with Dr. Karlstrom, and that is related to the avatars and the nodes that represent individual people. Over 7 billion nodes and avatars given and assigned to every single person on the planet within the sentient world simulation came right out of Purdue. It's a 2013 paper, 2014 it was instituted. Okay, this has been going in parallel development to the model numbers of the D-Wave computers. They work lockstep because the adiabatic quantum computers runs the sentient world simulation, which also encompasses Palantir, which we have talked about. This is the new surveillance system that has subsystems all built within it from the intelligence agencies around the world. So SWS is what is manipulating people. And Kev, you said it, the avatars and the nodes, when those are manipulated digitally in the simulation, it manifests physically in the human brain and the physical body. Outside of the SWS, it is like pulling strings. It is like a puppet on a string. So I'm going to finish this statement, let you get into the article by saying, Kev, this is our new version of string theory from particle physics.
It truly is. And it's almost with the more data that it's been fed, this granularity as you speak about, as that has increased, it's almost spontaneously formed some kind of quantum entanglement. Now, I just didn't mean that if you picture that even just picture that kind of process, because what's happening in that virtual world now is manifesting in the real world. That's the kind of thing that we're kind of talk about here. Now, back to this article that we found in phys.org, and it's coming right from today. This is talking about something called hyper entanglement across rooftops paves the way towards a global quantum internet. And it says here, for the first time, physicists have demonstrated that hyper-entangled photons can be transmitted in free space, which they showed by sending many thousands of these photons between the rooftops of two buildings in Vienna. Now, hyper-entanglement means that the photons are simultaneously entangled in at least two different properties. In this experiment, the researchers combined the two-dimensionally entangled properties to achieve four-dimensional hyper-entanglement. Now, by showing that hyper-entanglement transmission is feasible in the real world and not only in the lab, the physicists expect that the demonstration could one day be scaled up to establish a highly secure quantum internet that uses satellites to quickly and securely transmit quantum information across the globe. And the physicists, led by Rupert Urson at the Institute of Quantum Optics and Quantum Information at the Austrian Academy of Sciences in Vienna, have published a paper on the distribution of hyperentanglement via atmospheric free links in a recent issue of Nature. Now, it goes on to say here, just to wrap it up, that hyperentangled states have several advantages over states with only one entangled property, including higher data rates and improved levels of security in quantum communication. So far, however, experiments involving hyperentanglement have only been demonstrated in protected laboratory environments across very short distances. The ability to transmit hyperentangled states via optical free space links will allow for transmission over longer distances than is possible using fiber optics on the ground. Now, Anthony, we've had the Chinese recently having one of these satellites up there, and they were proving entanglement with base stations down here. So we're starting to see the infrastructure coming up here. It might even already be out there when we hear from you in just a moment for this quantum internet.
Yeah, the quantum internet is necessary for the interconnection, the daisy chaining, the networking of the quantum computers. And that is now 14 models at D-Wave of quantum computers, and well over 1 million qubits just in the 14th model, and well over 2 million qubits if you add up all 14 models. Now, within those model numbers are individual computers, because each model is an upgrade, a latest generation upgrade to their existing customers, both in the private sector corporations as well as the intelligence agencies that are all customers. So we have more than just 14 individual computers that all have to be daisy chained and linked. The reason that they have to be networked together is that if they were to remain as sentient but independent artificially intelligent quantum computers, they would conflict with one another. And we've seen this and proven this just with the phones, with the personal assistants in the phones. So AI, even with the robots that we've seen that have developed their own independent language, they will compete with one another and never give up until one or the other is defeated. And if you apply that to the human application, until somebody dies. The point here is that they have to be networked through a worldwide system of quantum entanglement so that they will cooperate with one another. You have literally now, with this photon-driven entanglement system, the ability to have the hive mind instituted worldwide and driven by the adiabatic quantum computer system. Go ahead.
This is utterly amazing. And just thinking about this here, because we were talking about the small cell stations that they're going to have to be popping up everywhere for the 5G network, Anthony. And, these kind of contraptions, when they're deployed, rooftop level, I mean, that they're going to be everywhere as well, I imagine, right?
Yes, they will. And it's
this is the bit that really got me, like I said to you earlier, because when I got into the quantum stuff, like I said, I was quite struck today when we mentioned quantum internet, because I'd never ever thought about this. I'd always thought about quantum computing, the likes of me or the listeners out there, for whatever reason we might need time on a quantum computer, we would get it through the cloud. And we've seen D-Wave offering up the quantum cloud just recently. But this talk of a fully kind of quantum internet, and then the encryption that must come along with that as well. I mean, this is really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and it's not just encrypted communications for security of the data reasons, but remember, I keep saying the granularity of the data reaching a point where data will spontaneously convert to matter. Now, that's within the sentient world simulation. What we're talking about in the process of photons transmitting in a quantum entangled and thus secure manner, transmitting information, is you're presenting. Again, we've related Pokemon Go as just an example, just like Mandela is just an example. When you look at the virtual world, the augmented digital reality of Pokemon Go, think of that being applied worldwide, way beyond the Project Bluebeam discussion, to where you have digital information that is through photons being transmitted and creating the visual aspect of the reality. You have the ability through 5G, through the electronic transmission of signals, and now the photon ability of transmitting information, the two combined give you that density, that granularity of data that will reach such a point of density that you will not be able to distinguish what we would call today the analog world of a physical reality from the digital world within the sentient world simulation, and that it will be touchable. We've already seen 3D holograms that produce touchable, manipulative, solid objects in the laboratory. Think of that worldwide. This is where they want to take human beings. In the hive mentality scenario, they want to take them into a new physical reality produced by the granularity of digital data.
This is like the digital 21st century version of They Live. But myself and Tony were fresh out of bubblegum. We'll be back on the other side of the break with the final segment of tonight's Kev Baker Show, right here on the only network that matters. Come on, share it everywhere. TFRlive.com.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Kev Baker. This is the Kev Baker Show. Tonight we've got Anthony Patch here. Another amazing, absolutely brilliant show. I get to geek out on stuff like nano diamonds, qubits, all the good stuff. And I know everyone out there, you're enjoying this as well. And you can find Anthony's work over at anthonypatch.com. Now, I was talking earlier on about the kind of fact that I'd put together a couple of photoshops during last or previous shows with Tony, showing the striking resemblance between the detectors over in Geneva at CERN and MRI machines. Now, I recently had a kind of date with an MRI machine myself, and I was tongue-in-cheek saying how it was my date with a mini version of CERN. And it's quite striking, the similarity, and there's a reason for that. We're going to get into that more with Anthony right now. And I'm posting these pictures, Tony. And like I say, I mean, once you get this connection made, you see it right away. I mean, it's blatantly just a massive MRI machine.
Yeah, it really is. All you have to do is look at the components of the detectors, and that's exactly what it is. It's a 3-story, multi-ton MRI machine, but for the purpose of their application, it is going to be, as I said earlier, the resequencing of the digitized DNA patterns, the codes of ancient DNA. This is DNA they want to resurrect, and they will then combine that with a form of a 3D printer, which you and I have talked about in the context of Dr. What's his name? Venter. Thank you. I'm looking at an article here. Craig Venter, using a bioprinter is a better way of calling it. So these will be bioprinters as well as MRI machines that will reassemble this digital DNA, and using the building blocks of, our proteins and amino acids of our DNA to recreate life. And that's quite literally what they're going to do.
Is that what he actually utilized when he created that bacteria, that totally synthetic, or as I prefer to call it, alien life form? This bacteria, so he actually used this bioprinter already. This isn't stuff that we're talking about from Star Trek or anything like that, folks. This is from bioengineering, and this guy is one of the top cats in all of that. He cracked the human genome, or at least he's given credit for it. He's got his own kind of name written in his DNA, I think, now as well, because of CRISPR technology, Tony. And this is the science that they're into.
Yeah, and again, this all started with UC Berkeley with their synchrotron, as I said, with hard X-rays and protein folding, and this all, quite literally folded into this digitizing of DNA, transmitting it through the cloud, and using a reassembler, a resequencer, and then a bioprinter to actually proven, this is all in the white papers, all peer-reviewed information, that they have successfully utilized bioprinters to reproduce a biological, if you want to call it a clone, but a copy or an actual representation of the original biological sample. And there's even the discussion of, transmitting this stuff digitally to other planets and growing your astronauts, if you will, on other planets. So that's the scenario that they've been talking about. I'm sure you'll see Elon Musk bringing that scenario to, a greater degree of illumination, so to speak, in the public's mind very shortly. But let me get to the MRI specifically. We've got an article here, April 26th of 2017. Again, phys.org. Again, tip of the spear information, folks. We're talking about nanodiamond enhanced MRI offers greater range of diagnostic and therapeutic applications. Now, in the June issue of Entangled magazine, I published an article called Sentient World Simulation and Mind Control, and I detailed how an MRI is used to implant thoughts, okay? The reverse engineering of an MRI to implant thoughts. Now, that was published back in June by myself. What I'm going to read to you right now from this article, where they're talking about, nanodiamonds and MRI machines. So this is all part of, this progress of nanodiamonds being utilized across the spectrum of mainstream science. So here we go. The researchers have noted several possible applications for their new approach to nanodiamond enhanced MRI. These include the accurate detection of lymph node tumors, which can aid in the treatment of metastatic prostate cancer and exploring the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. So going on from that, where they're talking about the, supposed benefits to humanity, it also says in the present study, the researchers show how that they could achieve nanodiamond enhanced MRI by taking advantage of a phenomenon known as the Overhauser effect, and we'll define that in a minute. But it sounds very foreboding. We should have some music for that, Kev. The Overhauser effect.
I think we should play his fifth concerto by Overhauser.
Oh, that's right. It's the Overhauser 5G concerto.
Oh, I like it.
Okay, as the Overhauser effect to boost the inherently weak magnetic resonance signal of diamond through a process called hyperpolarization, in which the nuclei are aligned inside a diamond so they create a signal detectable by an MRI scanner. The conventional approach to hyperpolarization uses solid-state physics techniques at cryogenic temperatures, but the signal boost doesn't last very long and is nearly gone by the time the nanoparticle compound is injected into the body. By combining the Overhauser effect with advances in ultra-low field MRI coming out of the Martino Center, the researchers were able to overcome this limitation, thus paving the way for high contrast in vivo, which is in the body, nanodiamond imaging over indefinitely long periods of time. Translation: rather than super cold cryogenic processes in the hospital of an MRI, they're now able to use room temperature nanodiamonds that are injected into the body that are much more easily detectable in the magnetic field. So nanodiamonds being used for an MRI is exactly the same process of third strand of DNA nanoparticles that are receivers, just like in the MRI discussion here, they are receivers of the Overhauser effect signals for the purpose of mapping the human brain or the whole body in the hospital. But this is exactly the same ultra-low field MRI regime that is used to activate the third strand of DNA. This is a smoking gun, folks. I'm going to go to the Overhauser effect just so that we can define that for you, because it's important that we do that. The nuclear Overhauser effect, NOE, is the transfer of nuclear spin polarization from one spin path to another spin path via cross relaxation. In nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, sometimes known as NOS with an S, can be used to help elucidate the structures of organic compounds. What we're saying here, folks, is we're back to talking about the spin of quantum particles. The Overhauser effect communicates the spin of one group of particles to other particles to change their spin. One group is spinning in a specific polarized fashion and can communicate through cross-relaxation that same change of spin to a particular polarization of spin through this cross-relaxation. This is what happens when you implant an image or a memory or a Mandela effect in the human brain, is through the Overhauser effect of changing the spin of quantum particles throughout the brain and thus throughout the DNA of the body. And the DNA is your database. It is your data bank. It is your server. And therefore, through this spin polarization, it distributes throughout all of the other quantum particles, changing their spin through the cross relaxation that occurs in the Overhauser effect. And this is the latest information just coming out in modern science about medical applications of what we just talked about. But this is not just relegated to the hospital environment. This is how they conduct massive, multiple million mind manipulation and control, is by changing the spin polarization within the brain. Go ahead.
This is absolutely, like you say, a smoking gun in this whole discussion on, let's call it Mandela effects for now, but if we think of this mind control on the whole, the Mandela effects are the symptoms. They're kind of the telltale signs that something's going on, that maybe we've been played with. And now, nowhere else have you heard the fact that the method by which they are able to do this, to communicate that new spin, rewrite memories basically, and that's why it seems so set in your mind. They've literally changed a physical memory. And the process they do that, the Overhauser effect. Wow. Anthony, honestly, this is amazing. and to share with the audience how we came across this. It's TFR type kind of legend stuff, because we're reading one article and then I noticed down at the bottom it says, some related articles that you might find interesting. And I seen nano diamonds and I seen MRI in the same sentence. And I even said to you in the email that I'm just going to quickly read it now. It was the headline that jumped out at me. And here we have a gem, again, pardon the obvious pun, buried within this little story on phys.org.
Okay.
There he is.
Go ahead.
What's happening in the background, Patch? Is it Men in Black there distracting you?
No, that's okay. Go ahead with your thought, because I'm going to move into another one regarding the Greek Kabbalah.
The Greek Kabbalah? Oh, please, I have to let you get into that. No, I'd finished my thought. It was just the fact that we found this story basically by chance, because it was one of these related articles. And then within the story, we find this Overhauser effect. And like I was saying, the Mandela effect is the symptom, and Overhauser effect is the method.
It really is. And, again, it proves what you and I have said for so long, that they are changing the spin of quantum particles in the mind. That's how the mind control operates. And it's important that people know the specific mechanisms that are taking place, so that you see that this is real, this is tangible, this is provable evidence of what is going on. People want to say conspiracy theorists. Well, we don't do that. We take the papers, the peer-reviewed papers, we take the articles of the hard science, we give you the technical nuts and bolts for a reason, and that's so that it becomes real to you as the audience. And we have the benefit of a consistent audience base. And that audience is comprised of people who do their own critical thinking, do their own research, and they crave and expect from us, Kev, this kind of information down to this level of examination, because nobody else is doing it. We're the ones that are putting the hard information out there. But we also have Dr. Karlstrom, who does parallel work as well. We just kind of get down deeper into the weeds, is all I'm saying. But I do have something I want to talk about with the Kabbalah. So go ahead.
Before you go to that, when you say deep in the weeds, right, let me just kind of quantify this for people. And tonight's show, perfect example of what I'm going to say here, because you say you like to get into the details, and we do. And I suppose that's why people keep coming back for more. But I think we're kind of selling ourselves short when you say we're just getting into the details, because we're literally, especially tonight, taking it right down to the very last photon. And when it comes to a photon, there is no smaller kind of quantity in the whole universe, right down at that nano quantum scale, Tony. Isn't one photon like the smallest you get?
Yeah, it's an elementary particle, and it can be both a wave and a particle at the same time. So it's one of those interesting quasi-elements, elementary particles that built the universe. And yeah, you cannot really get much smaller than a photon itself. And a photon is actually defined in the world of science as information.
And as we're learning here with hyperentanglement, depending on how many kind of dimensions that they can add to that, this is going to increase the data that they're able to encode in just one photon, Tony.
Yes, indeed. I mean, they will be able to pack a lot more information and increase that density of information converting to matter. And again, Kev, there's nobody out there talking except you and me about this scenario of the conversion of data to matter. But this is what we extrapolate. This is what we extract from their research. And as our pattern has shown over almost 3 years now, Kev, we're way ahead of the curve, and we sound like we're blowing our own trumpets here, our own shofars, if you will. But people need to understand that this is the definitive source for real information about what's going on in the world. And we put in the long hours that it takes to research and dig this stuff out. And we just hope that you'll support us in that. But I want to get to the spiritual side. I want to get to the Greek Kabbalah this time, not necessarily the Hebraic side of the Kabbalah, but the Greek Kabbalah, if people will type in the word, and I'll pronounce it for you, it's tetractys, Tetractys, tetractys. If you just type in Greek Kabbalah tetractys, you'll see what I'm looking at here. But this is the familiar tree of life, the Kabbalah tree, the whole scenario about that. But my main point of bringing this up is, once again, if you look at the patterns of tetractys, you will see the tetrahedrons again. Now, people will jump on me and say, oh, sacred geometry, you're practicing Kabbalah, you're following all that when you talk about all the time tetrahedrons and my 600-cell tetrahedral model of the universe. I am not practicing the Kabbalah. I am not practicing sacred geometry. Those people that are practicing those have stolen that from the Creator, from God himself. This is God's geometry. This is God's mathematics. This is God's construct. And so the nefarious side, the enemy, they want to go and say, oh, we can explain the matrix of the universe without assigning it to God. We can say that this is a computer simulation that we're in, but not assign it to God. God created, if you want to call it the matrix, God created the geometry that comprises the matrix. He developed the mathematical formulas that derive from the geometric arrangements. But I'm just sharing with you, again, another smoking gun that backs up the tetrahedron as it applies to the spiritual side is represented in the Kabbalah as tetractys. Now, I don't have time tonight to go into that. Maybe we'll go into it more on Friday when Kev joins me for my show for 2 hours on Friday. But if you look at the arrangements, the geometric arrangements within the practice of tetractys, this is what they do to build the sentient world simulation. The Kabbalah tree is built out in a three-dimensional, not two-dimensional, but three-dimensional configuration of ever-increasing, ever-replicating tetrahedrons in their digital simulation, their matrix. They physically arrange the qubits, the quantum bits, in the tetrahedral patterns that form the Kabbalah tree, that forms the spherical arrangement of the sentient world simulation that envelops the spherical planet. Sorry, flat earthers, but it ain't flat. It is a geometric sphere, and they are copying, counterfeiting God's construct of the planet and the cosmos, which is built out of tetrahedrons, but they're copying and counterfeiting those tetrahedrons of God to create their own 600-cell tetrahedron as a spherical arrangement, thus creating, when they get the granularity, the solid reality within the SWS that has as its framework the 600-cell tetrahedron built of tetrahedrons, the tetractys practice within the Kabbalah itself. There you go, Kev.
And I mean, so much of science does come from the fact that we've looked at nature and it finds the most effective ways of doing things. So we try to replicate that. But what we're talking about here and the level we're going down to, I mean, we're talking about the very building blocks, the very code upon which everything is built. And it's the creator's code. That's literally what it is. And Tony, it's almost like they're hacking that with their antichrist system. Again, it's like I was talking about earlier on when we talked about possibly this new world order being this technology, this grid that we're moving into. I mean, I used to talk about mark of the beast and think it was a chip, but this mark of the beast, it's this whole system that we're talking about, and it's just to replace what is naturally, divinely here in the first place.
Yeah, that is very true. It is very true. And, to kind of wrap up the show here, if we go back and we look at D-Wave, and you look at the fact that they've used a black cube as their configuration, and you look at the fact that the qubit chipset, the chipset that holds the qubits, is arranged according to this Greek Kabbalah, the Hebraic Kabbalah, as the tetractys. Now, we've related it as background information to Dee and Kelly and developing their grid pattern where they have a square divided in quarters, and then they have plotted out within that grid pattern the information that they're deriving from fallen angels. We've assigned that same grid pattern to the constellation pattern of 5G. The data that is transmitted in 5G is arranged in a constellation pattern. There are two forms of constellation, both the square, which is the cube, 3D, and also the circle or the spherical in 3D. This is all tetractys. Whether you look at Dee and Kelly in the 1500s, or you look at the more modern applications of it with Crowley, or you look at it with D-Wave and the arrangement of their qubits, all of this is built in the system of tetractys. It is all about Kabbalah. That's the easy way to summarize this whole thing, Kev. What we're seeing in modern science is nothing more than the application of the practices of Kabbalah.
And it's Sun Tzu, very relevant to all the work we do. It says you've got to know your enemy. And you only have to look at Hollywood and people like Madonna and see just how invested into this Kabbalah magic that they are. And this is just a taste of the fact that the ones even above them, the ones we don't see behind the curtains, they are very, very much into it. And that's why it doesn't matter what you believe out there. You have to appreciate that this is the side that they're coming from. And when it's the darker, nefarious sides of science or whatever kind of genre or topic you're looking into, this is where it is all rooted, where it's all based from. And like we were saying before the show, Tony, again, it doesn't matter what guest I bring on now. I can go to the extremes from the technology all the way out to Bill Bean coming on with his spiritual sword and telling us of his latest kind of jobs he's had to go and help people with. And it all connects together because there's a spiritual aspect to absolutely everything that we talk about. And that, again, comes from the fact that that's where all this is coming from these dark elites, the ones that fund these things, the ones who are using this magic. I'm not going to call it science when we're talking about the elites using it, because it is modern-day magic. Anthony was the first one I heard comparing the kind of stuff that Dee and Kelly were up to, then Crowley, to what's going on with a quantum computer. And the more I've learned, it's absolutely that. It really is. And it just shows you that this is magic. It's not just science we're talking about here. Yeah, there's some cool stuff on the back of that. If we were living in that perfect world that we all want to achieve. We really do. But we have to remember that the ones behind the scenes, they have this nefarious spiritual grounding where all of this is coming from, Tony. And that's why I'm glad you and others like you always remind people that there is this spiritual side to everything.
That's right. You cannot separate the physical from the spiritual and vice versa. And very quickly, if you look at recurrent neural network deep machine learning with the new AI computer systems, all of that grid work, all of that Boltzmann machine diagramming that we've put out so many times, that Boltzmann machine is tetractys. That's where they got it from. That's how they set it up. That's how the machines are learning, is through the Kabbalah.
And we're all learning this together. We're all here, like I was saying just the other night, for such a temporary, brief moment. But right now, the time we do share here, we are learning all about this together. This is all totally new to me before I met Anthony as well. So it's, in a sick kind of way, I was going to say it's fun actually learning all of this. But like Sun Tzu says, you have to know your enemy, and we have to know the systems that we're up against. And that's why it's always great as well, the fact back night after night to hear Johnny Whistles. It's like some kind of Mandela effect in the making. But Anthony, we've got so much to get into tonight. Of course, we've got this new 2-hour slot. We can take our time. We can explain things a lot more thoroughly for the listeners out there. But I'm really excited about the stuff that we're going to be covering again tonight, because this is all the kind of stuff that I first fell in love with: your books, your information, I was so excited to have you on the show in the first place.
Well, thank you. And it is great having the 2 hours. We can go at a little bit slower pace, but we've got a lot to pack in here tonight. We're going to talk about nano diamonds, and I'm going to kind of give the headline, the punchline. Gordy Rose, we speak of him an awful lot related to D-Wave. And as you know, he's moved over to the Kindred company building robots. Well, we're going to talk about self-replicating quantum computers composed of C60 carbon nanodiamonds that build themselves structurally, not just the qubits, but the actual structure of the computer itself is self-replicating. And that's happening at Kindred. But I'm not going to bring out the actual source material today. That's going to come out during our 2-day conference in September 16th and 17th. We will present the documented facts of how Kindred is self-replicating what I call the 600-cell tetrahedron spherically configured quantum computer.
And, I think it's only fair that we give Geordie Rose the odd shout out. I mean, he is a firm follower of the information that you and I and others here on the network put out there, Anthony. We know that. Yeah. He did confirm that in his recent Tech Vancouver presentation. But this Kindred company, if you missed the kind of shows that myself and Anthony and Johnny have done on them, this is the new company that Gordy Rose has gone and set up. And this is more taking AI, as he calls it, into robotics. And it's a creepy, creepy company. And I say that because he treats these AI robots as if they're children. And the reason he does that, he and his kind of colleagues, is because they think for a machine, an AI, to attain consciousness, they have to replicate the upbringing as closely as possible to that of an actual child. And we've often spoken in the past about these neural networks, Anthony, about how there's almost generations of them and layers of them. And it is, this whole process of the AI, it's such a good analogy to compare it to the kind of upbringing of a child.
Yeah, it really is. And in my book, 2048 Diamonds in the Rough, there is a quantum computer that is spherically arranged. It's a 600 cell on board a submarine that is combined and composed of nanodiamonds itself. It's a sentient submarine in the shape of a manta ray. Now, the point here is this computer is sentient and AI, and it begins around the age of 12 when it is first, let's say, flipped the switch.
Assembled into a triple helix, because as we've mentioned on the show before, even the guys, the Dr. Watson and Dr. Crick, when they were trying to work out this DNA molecule, I mean, there was talk at the start of that. They were looking at a triple helix because that seemed to fit the bill more than the double helix did. And here we have the 5G that we keep on talking about now with multiple guests, because this really is such a big threat and it's right upon us right now. Could it be then, Tony, that when you have this 5G, because it goes millimeter deep, and some research says it may even penetrate the skin to a depth of 8 millimeters, is this literally unzipping the DNA then, ready for that third strand to be inserted?
Yeah, it really is. And again, the 5G, as you and Dr. Carlstrom discussed last night, is a continuation of our discussion on 5G the day before that. The deployment of not just boxes on telephone poles, so to speak, the boxes that are about a foot square that we've seen in the media presentations as transmitters and receivers of 5G, but literally down to microscopic size antennas for 5G that will be deployed everywhere. And when the new phones come out with 5G capability, they will have multiple antennas built in to the phones for 4G and 5G capabilities. So yes, the Internet of Everything. We're going to get into talking about some of the new types of sensors that are coming out, but the whole point is 5G penetrates the body, right down to the DNA level, and that is the mechanism by which they will flip the switch on the dormant nanoparticle third strand.
And obviously, calling on last night's show as well, Tony, just to build on that, you were listening to how the doc was talking about these false memories, and that fits like a hand in a glove with your information on the quantum pollution as well, and it builds a kind of bigger picture, and it seems to be now, every show as we go along, we're building a bigger and more detailed picture of this system that has been already built around us.
Yeah, and because we have plenty of time tonight, we're going to talk about the specifics of mind control. Because when you look at AI as a system, yes, it's an existential threat, and it's a today threat. It's actually been a threat for quite a while now. The point being is AI is just another tool in the toolbox for the ultimate application. And the ultimate application, as Dr. Carlstrom presented it, and I'm reinforcing and confirming with him, is the control of the mind and the control of the physical body. This is what the globalists want. They don't need guns and bullets. They don't need any other weaponry. All they need to do is control the minds and bodies of the population. And we'll get into that deeper as...
Now, Tony, there's a little bit more to this article, but so far, this is everything that you've been kind of talking about, including the DNA as well, and using these nanoparticles. This is in here as well, how they use the DNA structure for them to kind of self-assemble. This is amazing, and this is how we can take your stuff from a book of fiction and show that it really is the science from the real world that they're working on right now. In fact, who knows what they're working on now?
Yeah, this is some great, backstory for people, because with both my books, with Covert Catastrophe that I wrote in November of 2011, predating this 2013 article, I described this whole process of nanodiamond lattice work, the configuration, based upon the work that was done at UC Berkeley with their particle collider, their synchrotron, which produces hard X-rays that they infer the shape of DNA, specifically the protein folding, the proteins that make up DNA. And from the ability to infer the shape and the construct of proteins within DNA, they were able to then predict how the nanodiamonds would self-assemble. So what they did was, in the early stages of this nanodiamond research, is they provided an artificial lattice, a medium let's say in a petri dish sort of a scenario, just to make it simple. And upon this lattice work, the diamonds would self-adhere, and then they would self-replicate. And they then took that to the process of creating the nitrogen voids within each nanodiamond, then using a specific frequency pulsed laser to transmit photons representing either a 0 or a 1 that is then placed within this nitrogen vacancy void, this defect, literally, within the diamond. And as long as the diamond remained intact, that information remained stable and intact. So you have a virtual permanent database of information housed in the diamonds. And they also showed that they had a natural affinity in self-replicating in this lattice work to define a double helical structure, and in fact, a triple helix structure. And therefore, back in 2013, I began this whole discussion of the nanoparticles that are being sprayed on us, that are nanodiamonds, that are dormant, which through electromagnetism, through signals, specifically millimeter wave 5G signals, the dormant nanoparticle, nanodiamonds within all of us would be, upon throwing the switch of 5G, would activate this self-replication process of these nanodiamonds that comprise the third strand of DNA. That is in both of my books, Covert Catastrophe and 2048 Diamonds in the Rough, producing this artificial, self-replicating computer system.
I think it's really interesting there how you said it even.
And it goes live on board the submarine. But it progresses through adolescence and early adulthood all the way up to the age of 33. And I wrote that back in 2014.
You see, well ahead of everyone else. And this was the first time I had ever heard of nano diamonds. And, you know, when I'd read new stuff like that, he's all new anyway. Before I met Anthony, there was a geek in me. Science, used to love it. So when I heard about these nano diamonds, I started to have a look around, see what was going on with them. And there was one article that I saved back at the time, and this just encapsulates everything that we're going to kind of go into tonight. And I'm going to go through this here. And it comes from back in 2013. So this is nothing new at all. And it says that the first assembled nano diamond qubits are the vanguard of the quantum computing revolution. German researchers have devised a technique of creating self-assembled nano diamond qubits that could form the basis of quantum computers and storage devices, unlike every other quantum tech that we've seen here on the website. And it could operate at room temperature. Now, that factor itself is very, very interesting, because usually when we're talking about quantum effects and quantum bits, as in the qubits, we're usually talking about right down at the very lowest end of the Kelvin scale, very, very cold, to keep that coherence. But yet here they are talking about these things operating at room temperature. And to carry on, it says there are many ways of storing quantum data: atom spin, electron spin, photon spin. There are also many mediums that can act as qubits too: single atoms, laser light, and whole molecules. One combination excels above all others, though: storing photons in a diamond nitrogen vacancy center. And this is where it gets really, really cool. It says here, this is essentially a diamond molecule, which is made up of carbon atoms, with a single nitrogen atom replacing one of the carbons. It turns out that nitrogen atoms are remarkably good at storing photons, including the quantum data that they carry for incredibly long periods, and they talk about milliseconds here. Now, more importantly, while virtually every other qubit material must be kept at cryogenic temperatures, diamond nitrogen qubits can do this at room temperature without suffering from decoherence. The problem so far, though, has been the constructing small enough diamonds that the nitrogen atoms, the individual qubits, are close enough to each other that they can interact. According to Technology Review, the diamonds have to be within 10 nanometers of each other. And now Andreas Albrecht and fellow researchers at the University of Ulm, Germany, get this. They have used DNA to build a scaffold that allows 6 nanodiamonds to self-assemble in a ring, potentially creating a 6-qubit quantum computer.
This is the Kev Baker Show. Seeking answers to age-old questions, deciphering the world painted around you by the mainstream media. This is the Kev Baker Show. And now, here is your host, Kev Baker.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back, ladies, gentlemen, children, Wookiees. It's another 2 hours of live radio right here with me, your host, Kev Baker. And you're tuned into the Kev Baker Show right here on TFRlive.com. Big audience tonight. I want to thank all of you for continuing to support the show, the network, and of course, tonight's guest stroke co-host, Mr. Anthony Patch, is with me as well. And these Monday and Wednesday shows, much like I was saying with Dr. Eric Karlstrom last night, really proud of the series of shows and the information that myself, Johnny, and of course Mr. Anthony Patch were connecting the dots on all things AI, quantum computing, the latest in kind of biohacking, all this kind of stuff. And tonight, it's going to be no different because we're going to be revisiting a topic that I first came across when I was lucky enough to read one of or a couple of Mr. Patch's books that are out there. Of course, those books are Covert Catastrophe and 2048 Diamonds in the Rough. And packed into those books is so much science. A geek like me, it's like an overload. It was brilliant. But there was one thing that stood out in all of that, and they were called nano diamonds. And that's why tonight, we've entitled tonight's show Diamonds in the Rough. And more of that in just a moment. But for all of you Johnny Whistle hardcore supporters out there, much love and prayers to the big man, because his temporal Mandela effect has struck again. Should have loaded the soundboard for that one. I really should have. Now, Anthony, I've obviously butchered the name of what's up with Johnny. And on a more serious note, I mean, we're sending prayers and love to the big man. We hope he gets well soon. But what is it that's actually wrong with John again? Calling on your paramedic history here, Tony.
I think he's been in the boxing ring too much. He has a temporal mandibular joint infection. So picture your temporal bone, which is the side of your head, around where your ear is. And then you have your jawbone, which is your mandible. And where that joint meets, where the jawbone meets with the side of your head, is the joint. And so it's called a temporal mandibular joint infection, TMJ. But I like yours better. So we'll call it the temporal Mandela effect.
Exactly. There's some people out there new to the show. They've never heard of Johnny Whistles. They don't know if he exists or not. We've got these people who come